and welcome to the Pharaonic Village. This was the inspiration of Dr. Hassan Regev, who wanted to recreate an ancient Egyptian village on the banks of the Nile, as authentic an environment as possible. The village is surrounded by an extensive papyrus plantation, which not only reproduces the ancient surroundings, but also, along with the hundreds of trees which were planted around the village, provides an effective screen to isolate this glimpse of Egypt's ancient past from sights and sounds of modern life. The Pharaonic Village covers an area of 32 acres, where people dressed in the clothes of ancient times perform their daily tasks in agriculture, industry, religious affairs and home life, using replicas of the tools and instruments of the ancient Egyptians. When Dr. Abdus-Salam Regev took over the village from his father, he expanded it with 10 special museums, covering such varied subjects as mummification, ancient boats, the Coptic and Islamic periods, and the life of President Nasser. Dr. Abdus-Salam has made the Pharaonic Village into an open book on Egyptian history and culture. You are about to take a voyage back in time to the land of the pharaohs 4,000 years ago. Between the trees is a statue of the Roman god Nilos, the personification of the river Nile. Nilos rests his arm on the Sphinx, symbol of Egypt's great antiquity, and is attended by crocodiles which were found in the Nile in ancient times. The children surrounding the god reckon fertility brought to the land by the annual flood. First of all, we will enter the Canal of Mythology, where there are statues of some of the principal gods and pharaohs of ancient times. The plant growing in the water here is papyrus, which was used by the ancient Egyptians for making paper. The modern name actually comes from the name of the plant. Papyrus grew abundantly in Egypt in Pharaonic times, especially in the marshes of the Delta. But it gradually disappeared after new methods of manufacturing paper were brought to this country from China in about 1000 AD. The ancient art of making paper from papyrus was lost until about 30 years ago, when Dr. Hassan Regev started this papyrus plantation and rediscovered the art after many years of research. Papyrus was also used for making boats, mats and sandals, and the lower part of the stem was sometimes eaten as a vegetable. The papyrus plant was the symbol of Lower Egypt, the northern part of the country, while the lotus flower was the symbol of Upper Egypt. As well as being prized for its perfume, the lotus symbolized resurrection to the ancient Egyptians, because the flower opens when the life-giving sun is out and closes when the sun sets.
Now let us journey through the Canal of Mythology and meet some of the ancient gods.
Of resurrection, judge of the underworld, lord of eternity. I was worshipped throughout the Middle Kingdom. When I am painted on the walls of tombs, I am often shown as a mummy, and my skin is green. But when I was king of Egypt, the land was peaceful and prosperous, and Sovereign Lord, God of the sun and the moon. My wicked uncle, Set, murdered my father and stole his throne. When I became a man, I attacked Set to reclaim what was mine. It was a bloody battle, and Set gouged out my left eye, driving inside of me. But Thoth, the god of wisdom, healed me, and I fought on. In the end, I triumphed and won back the throne. The symbol of my lost eye, the Eye of Horus, is now became Pharaoh, I had those same images destroyed and her name stricken from the walls of the temples and tombs. I was sure that if I destroyed those relics, the world would forget her. But she has not been forgotten. And so, despite my 17 military campaigns and my great successes as Pharaoh, I am often remembered only as Queen Hatshepsut's stepson, the Pharaoh child in waiting. Won't history ever forget her?
Egyptians to measure the rise of the annual flood, which occurred every summer. This enabled tax assessors to estimate the revenue from the grain harvest the following spring. Even in those days, farmers complained that they did all the work and the taxman got all the profit.
I am Akhenaten, Pharaoh of Egypt and worshipper of one God, the god Aten. Until my 5th year of reign, I was known as Amenhotep IV, a name which means Amen of life, the protector of Egypt. I tried to teach my people the power of Aten, and I built for them a beautiful new capital, the city of Tel El Amarna. My wife Nefertiti and I lived in this capital, and it was there that she gave birth to my son, Tutankhamun. But when I died, the people forsook my God and betrayed Aten to worship Amen once again. Even my son, Tutankhamun, gave up his birth name and became Tutankhamun to appease the
great temple at Abu Simbel in Nubia, south of Aswan. This magnificent building, with its famous colossal statues of the king, was cut entirely in the rock, along with the nearby temple of Ramesses' favorite queen, Nefertari. The two temples were rescued from the waters of Lake Nasser when the Aswan High Dam was being built in the 1960s. Discovery of the child Moses, whose mother had put him in a basket and floated it on the Nile to prevent him from being killed by Pharaoh's soldiers. The child was discovered by a member of Pharaoh's family and was brought up in the royal palace. Eventually, he became a prophet who led his own people, the Hebrews, out of Egypt. The grotesque dwarf god Bes was a great favorite with the Egyptians. He was believed to protect people against snakes and scorpions, and was particularly regarded as a patron of women in childbirth. In general, Bes was the god of pleasure and enjoyment of every kind. Scenes of agriculture and industry. The nobleman and his wife are enjoying the fresh air in their garden pavilion. They are playing a game called Senet, a game for two players, a form of which is still played in Egypt today. Ploughing is the first operation in preparing the land for cultivation, and here we see the ploughman with his team and the simple wooden plough. After ploughing, the heavy clods of soil are broken up with a hoe, and then furrows are made with the broad-bladed mattock. The sower scatters the seed from a small bag or basket, and sheep follow the sower to press the seed into the tough soil with their feet. Beside the houses in the background are pigeon towers. The Egyptians kept pigeons for food, and they were used for carrying messages, especially for the army. The fields are irrigated by means of the shadoof, which works like a balance, with a bucket at one end of a long pole and a heavy stone as a counterweight. Shadoofs are still sometimes used in the Egyptian countryside. When the grain is harvested, the sheaves are carried to the threshing floor in a net bag hung on a long pole. When a thick layer of grain has been spread on the circular floor, oxen or cows are driven round to break up the ears of grain with their heavy feet. The next process is winnowing, when the grain is tossed up into the air so that the lighter chaff or husk will blow away on the wind. The grain is then taken to be stored in the silos. The scribe makes a careful record of all the grain which is being stored. This was important for taxation purposes, as there was no money in Egypt in Pharaonic times. Honey was used for sweetening by the ancient Egyptians, as sugarcane was not grown in Egypt in those days. Beehives were made of pottery tubes piled up in rows, and in some parts of the country, beehives are still made this way today. The River Nile was the main highway of communication in Pharaonic times, so boat building was an important industry. Small boats were made of bundles of papyrus tied together with ropes. Such boats were used for short journeys and for fishing or hunting trips. Larger boats were made of wood, usually cedar wood imported from Lebanon. Wooden boats were pegged together with dowels and sewn together with ropes, as can be seen in the cross-section on the bank. When the boat was put into the water, the wood expanded and the rope shrank, so the boat became completely watertight. A royal boat of this type can be seen in the museum beside the Great Pyramid of King Cheops at Giza. The palm tree was a valuable resource for the Egyptians. The trunk was used in house building, and the branches provided fronds for making mats and baskets, while furniture and boxes were made from the ribs. The boxes were used for storage and as cages for small animals and birds. The Egyptians today still use the various parts of the palm tree for the same purposes. There were many different kinds of fish in the Nile and its canals which made good food, and fishing was also popular as a sport. One method of fishing can be seen here, where a net is stretched between two boats, and the fisherman hits the water with a stick to frighten the fish into the net. Let's see if he's been lucky today.
The ancient Egyptians were the first people to do sports. We have many depictions showing us the ancient Egyptians while we were playing stick fighting, archery, and wrestling.
Next are demonstrations of some industries and crafts, the first of which is brickmaking. The material used is the Nile mud, which is mixed with water and chopped straw into a thick paste. This paste is put into a wooden mould, and the bricks are then simply left to dry in the sun. As there is little heavy rain in Egypt, these mud bricks can last for centuries. The houses of the ancient Egyptians, even the palaces of the pharaohs, were constructed of sun-dried mud brick. The roof was made of split palm trunks covered with branches. The building was covered with a thick layer of mud, which acted as insulation against heat, wind, and rain. Glassmaking was introduced into Egypt after the military campaigns of Thutmose III about 1450 BC, when captive glassmakers were brought here from Syria. Glass was used for making beads, inlays, amulets and small vessels, which were formed around a core, as glass blowing was not invented until the 1st century BC. In Ptolemaic times, Alexandria became a centre of glass craftsmanship, and in the Roman period, fine cameos were produced in the same city. Are also famous for mummifying their dead. Mummification is basically dehydration, and to speed up this process, the internal organs of the body were removed and preserved separately. The body was dried out by being covered with natron salt, a form of soda found in the deserts of Egypt. The body was then cleaned and embalmed and wrapped in several layers of linen bandages. Amulets were put between the bandages to protect the mummy from harm. The whole process took 70 days. Pottery making is one of the oldest crafts in Egypt, dating back to about 6000 BC. The clay is kneaded with water and mixed with ground potsherds or chopped straw, which helps the finished pot to dry evenly without cracking. The potter forms the pot with his fingers as he kicks the wheel round with his foot. The handles are added afterwards, and the pot is dried in the sun for a while before being fired. Now for a little Egyptian magic. This scene shows the different stages in decorating a stone wall. First of all, the surface is levelled, then smoothed and polished with a piece of hard stone. Grid lines are marked in red on the prepared surface to ensure accurate enlargements of the original drawings. The artist copies the outline onto the wall, working from the sketch made by the chief artist on a small slab of stone or a piece of papyrus. Then the sculptor carves the design in relief with his mallet and chisel. Finally, the details would be painted in color to make the picture look as realistic as possible. Statues were partially carved in the quarry where the stone for them was cut. First of all, the block of stone is separated from the rock base by hammering wooden wedges into holes cut in the rock. The wedges are soaked with water, and as the wood expands, the block breaks away. After the stone has been smoothed and polished, the profile of the work is outlined on one side, and then the sculptor carves out the figure, rounding it off first on the front and then on the back. Vases were made from various kinds of stone, particularly alabaster, a soft stone which was worked into beautiful designs. After the rough piece of alabaster has been polished smooth, the inside is hollowed out with a drill with a flint or copper bit. The vase is sunk into the ground to prevent cracking during drilling. Alabaster vases were used as lamps and for storing perfumes and precious oils. The tools of the carpenter and joiner were made of copper, wood and bronze. On the left, a man is sawing a log of wood into planks. Other tools used were a hammer, chisel, an adze and a bow drill for boring holes. To the pharaohs that the army was well equipped at all times. Weapons included bows and arrows, swords, battle axes and spears, as well as shields and throw sticks. The horse-drawn war chariot was introduced into Egypt by the Hyksos from Western Asia around 1700 BC. Perfumes were very popular in ancient Egypt and consisted chiefly of fragrant oils and fats. The juice is extracted from sweet-smelling flowers in a bag of heavy canvas, the ends of which are twisted in opposite directions with wooden bars. This scented extract is then mixed with oil or fat as a base. Linen made from the flax plant was used by the Egyptians for clothing and many other purposes. Bundles of flax stalks are pulled through a large wooden comb to remove the tops and leaves. The stalks are soaked in water for a few days to soften them and then beaten with a wooden mallet. They are then pulled through a smaller comb to separate the fibers from the outer woody covering, and the good fibers are picked out and spun into thread on a spindle. The fine linen thread is then woven into cloth on a loom. The earliest looms in Egypt were horizontal, and the upright loom was brought to this country by the Hyksos. Another important industry was papyrus papermaking, for which the government had the monopoly. The lowest part of the stem is the best part for papermaking. The outer green rind is peeled off and the white pith is sliced into thin strips which are soaked in water. After repeated soaking, the now pliable strips are placed on a piece of cloth in 2 layers, one vertical and one horizontal. The surface of the sheet thus formed is then hammered with a wooden mallet to cause the fibers of the 2 layers to stick together. The sheet is then covered with another piece of cloth and pressed between 2 heavy stones for several days. During that time it also dries out in the hot sun and the piece of paper is ready for use. Good wine was appreciated in Pharaonic times, and this scene shows the method of winemaking. Bunches of ripe grapes are taken to the vat where the grapes are trodden out, and the juice extracted is poured into large pottery jars to ferment. When this process is complete, the jars are sealed with a clay seal, which is stamped with the date and the name of the vineyard where the grapes were grown.